In. On the panel today we have Anshul, myself, Pranav, and Eric. I call upon the Prime Minister to start off the debate. Yes, here.
Yeah.
One in every 4 young people in Spain is without a job. Unemployment has reached an all-time high of 10% in Italy. Deflation has hit new lows, and the euro currency is contracting at a rate of 0.2% per month. The Euro Monetary Union, its purpose and feasibility has been shaken to its foundations because of the sovereign debt crisis. To provide a better future for everyone in Eurozone states, it is imperative that Greece exit the Eurozone. What is the Eurozone? We're talking about the monetary union of European states sharing the euro currency. This is of course distinct from the European Union, which is a body for collective peacemaking and decision-making and legislation throughout all 27 European states. What is our stance on side government? First of all, we believe that it is better for all Eurozone member states if Greece exits the monetary union and reverts to the drachma. We support financial instrumentation to ensure that this change is gradual but ultimately achievable. For example, we'll start with a one-to-one exchange rate between the euro and the drachma, and this will be announced in advance so investors do not pull out. We think there's a precedence for this in how Germany changed from the Deutschmark to the from the Reichsmark to the Deutschmark, ultimately to the euro. In fact, how all countries within the eurozone transited into the common currency to start with. We just implement the same model except in reverse. We do not support the exit of Greece from the EU or other EU decision-making bodies, but we do accept the exit of Greece from the Eurozone Monetary Union specifically. We're going to forward 3 reasons why this is good for the Eurozone. First of all, that the exit of Greece furthers the basic principles of the Euro Monetary Union. Secondly, that it aids European recovery, and Samuel is going to talk to you in extension about how we help to build the European project. First of all, about the basic principles of the Eurozone. The premise of this argument is that Greece has broken multiple promises and agreements and is systematically likely not to change, and its insolvent behavior flies in the face of principles that established the EU Monetary Union. So why was a common currency set up in the Eurozone? It was intended to become a tool for collective prosperity and common economic growth. So this is distinct from the EU and other pan-European organizations which already existed at the point of the conception of the Eurozone. Therefore, it suggests to us that the purpose of the Eurozone was predominantly economic in nature, to aggregate and create common economic growth. Crucially, nations signed up for the EU common currency under the Treaty of Maastricht and the Treaty of Amsterdam with some agreements and some binding promises, namely to preserve fiscal solvency and responsible government spending. We think that Greece has broken a large number of these agreements and is likely to be systemically continue to do so. Number of reasons. First of all, the ruling party in Greece, Syriza, rides the wave of popular support. That's how it beat the Pan-Atlantic Socialist League in the recent elections. As a consequence of this, we think that popular support will always oppose austerity and lead the Greek government to overspend. As a consequence of this, it will never demonstrate the principles of financial stability that bound the EU Monetary Union to start with. Secondly, we think that Greece has a perverse incentive to continue irresponsible spending behavior because of the moral hazard. Because governments and administrators know that they can continue to spend irresponsibly because a common currency means that countries like France or Germany will always have an incentive to bail them out, to preserve confidence in that currency. So thank you. Therefore, we think that what Greece is doing hence contravenes to collective Eurozone principles and also lowers the norm regarding adherence to these base agreements to start with. Moreover, this is tremendously unfair to other Eurozone countries, such as Bulgaria or Poland, which were cash-strapped in the past amid attempts and agreements to implement lasting fiscal reform. The fact that Greece systemically is unlikely to implement such reforms means that it contravenes the principles of the EU Monetary Union.
Spain, Portugal, and Italy also breached the rules. Are you going to kick them out?
No, we think that Italy has made some attempts at fiscal reform, and austerity has been implemented in the wake of the EU financial crisis. It is factually incorrect that Italy has continued the same spend of overspending that led it to fiscal insolvency. So we think that there's the difference between Greece and Italy. Moreover, I'm going to transition now to my second argument about how, in fact, the exit of Greece aids Eurozone recovery. I'm going to prove to you how Greece depresses the value of the EU currency and precludes recovery. Hence, its exit will aid the Eurozone fiscally. There are 3 reasons why the exit of Greece will be beneficial for the Eurozone in recovery from the sovereign debt crisis. First of all, the value of the EU will be driven and increased by increased spending. The problem in Greece currently is that severely depressed wages and a lack of spending as consumers save money have led to a lack of purchase of goods. Consumer consumption in Greece has fallen by 20%, more than any other Euro economy. Therefore, this is that it is in a deflationary spiral where consumers purchase less goods, and this has driven down the value of the euro. What happens when fewer people in Greece, or no people in Greece rather, use the euro, is that we increase the amount of euro in circulation, and therefore it drives up its value and reduces the probability of deflationary spirals. This is important because it boosts the aggregate value of the EU currency as a whole, and this benefits other countries and other consumers who are currently on the euro currency. Secondly, we also increase investor confidence in the euro and euro-denominated assets. The nature of the common currency and the fact that Greece is part of it makes it inherently unpredictable. This is because the Greek government's demands are unpredictable and its monetary system is currently volatile and prone to shock. This has led to a lack of investor confidence and has also decreased confidence in the euro as a stable currency. That's why the Swiss central bank recently chose to unpack the Swiss franc from the euro because there was a lack of confidence in the ability of the euro to remain stable in the long term. So we think that by removing Greece, we remove the most volatile and unpredictable actor in the Eurozone monetary union, and therefore we increase confidence and the ability of people to predict what is likely to happen in the future. Third, we aid euro recovery because the presence of Greece in the Eurozone monetary union has led to millions of dollars being spent on bailouts. We think that countries like Germany and France are to bailing out Greece from financial insolvency because of failure to do so will lead to a collapse in the value of their currency. However, the problem is that Greece tends to be quite unreasonable with regard to demands for financial bailouts or compensation, like how recently the Greek minister demanded Germany pay disproportionately large reparations for abuses that supposedly happened in World War II. This is problematic because it saps funds from economies that could have been used for recovery. Moreover, it also depresses the euro currency, hurting the purchasing power of Eurozone citizens. So why do we believe the exit of Greece will ultimately be positive? Because it reduces the rate of euro deflation, and as a consequence, we increase purchasing power. It means that the poor man who's unemployed in Germany now may be able to find a job with better wages, might be able to purchase more with the money that he has. This is important because recovery is critically hinged on the value of euro currency, which is actively deflating. We think that as a consequence, the exit of Greece will bring benefits for all Eurozone members and also further the principles of the Eurozone monetary union. We are very proud to stand in government.
Okay. Thank you, Prime Minister, and I call upon the Leader of Opposition.
Today's side opposition stands for the unity of the European Union, the founding principle that the whole economic system was built upon. We stand upon giving more help to weaker economies in the European Union, and that includes countries like Greece, Portugal, and Spain. We also stand for increased regulations and increased monitoring of these weaker countries. So we expect these countries to submit their budget and fiscal reports to the European Union, to the European Parliament, to vet them through and subject them to regulations and control before we approve them, before we fund their financial endeavors, before we give them further bailouts. Today I'm going to tackle two of the first speaker's arguments. Firstly, about how the transition will be an easy process for Greece. And secondly, about how Greece is dragging down the whole European region and the EU. So what's the first idea about an easy transition? Now this is a huge myth perpetuated on their side. Now they try to ease us into this myth by telling us that there will be a slow transition over with a fixed and pegged currency comparing the Greece drachma to the European euro. We say this is fundamentally an impractical solution because Greece's economy is much weaker than whole Europe's economy. So in the European Union, you get a huge drop in investor confidence in Greece. And this translates into huge capital outflows out of Greece when investors don't have the faith that Greece can support itself. They don't have the faith that if there is continued bailouts from the European Union to continue propping up Greece, you see there will be huge capital outflows. So this will create a huge downward pressure on the create huge capital reserves to back up the Greek drachma against the euro. And this is financial reserves that no one can afford, that no one has currently. So I think fundamentally it's impractical for them to assume that there will be a slow, easy transition of the currency. No, thank you, sir. We think a more realistic situation is that there will be a huge, shocking depreciation of the Greek currency once it leaves the euro. And this will create catastrophic consequences for Greece's debt and for surrounding countries that are very unburdened in my case. No, thank you, sir. On the second point of attention about how Greece is dragging down the European Union. Now, their main argument is that Greece broke the rules, and therefore we should kick them out. Now, we think this is too simplistic of arguments, and it's not respecting the full unity of the European Union. We say Portugal and Spain broke those rules too. Are you going to kick them out of the European Union and destroy and shatter the whole promise of unity that the whole EU was built upon? We say that obviously can't be the case. We say the solution to this problem is increased regulation and increased monitoring to support Greece in its improvement and its economic recovery. Furthermore, they told us that Greece tracks on the EU because Greece's economy is not doing well and because Greece aren't spending enough. We say that's again a myth. Greece GDP is a really small part of Europe's GDP. So we think that the economic events in Greece has a really minor impact on the whole overall impact, whole prosperity of the European region. So we think on that side, that isn't a real argument. But really, I'll show you how Greece exit will create a contagion effect. You create loss of investor confidence. There's far greater consequences on the whole European region than simply poor consumer spending in Greece. So now on to my case, in 3 tiers. Firstly, I'll show you how the other side creates economic contagion, which harms the whole region in the long run and in the short run. Secondly, I'll show you how the other side endangers the future of bailouts, which is critical to ensure economic recovery for many weaker countries in the EU. And lastly, I'll show you how the other side harms the political legitimacy and political mandates of the whole European Union. So on to the first idea about economic contagion. Now basically, as I said earlier, the EU was created on the promise of unity, on the promise that no country will be dropped from this region. And in fact, investors make decisions based on this promise. They have faith in this promise. They believe that this promise is something that will be upheld. And that's the reason why they have faith in investing in Greece, Portugal, and Spain, because they believe in unity. They believe that no matter what, they'll be protected by the EU, they'll stay within the EU, and no one get left behind. So then on the other side, when they drop the EU, they shatter the credibility and the faith people have in this promise. So when that happens, we think people start looking for the weakest link in the euro. In other words, they start looking for the next country that's at risk from leaving the euro. And this means countries like Portugal, Ireland, and Spain. So we think investors will naturally lose confidence in these countries as well, because they'll be worried this country will leave the eurozone and will lose the help and support from the European Central Bank. Yes, sir.
There are many countries in the EU but not in the Eurozone Union. We told you that the latter is a purely economic body, not a political one.
Yeah, we think it's them leaving the European Union that is so problematic, because when they leave the European Union, for one, they lose the bailouts from the European Central Bank, and for second, the currency depreciates hugely, and it creates a balloon in the foreign debt, which they can't afford to pay up. So we think on that side, the moment Greece or any other country leaves the European Union, there will be catastrophic impacts on investor confidence. They will affect the whole region as a whole, not just Greece, but also other weaker and also poor performing countries in the European Union. So, no, thank you, sir. Now, we think when these countries leave, when people fear these countries leave the European Union, there's loss of investor confidence in these countries. That translates to 3 major impacts. Firstly, a pull out of government bonds. People start buying less government bonds or increase the interest rate that they demand on government bonds. This means the governments have less funds to finance critical investment projects and critical public services. Things like financing policemen or firemen or medicine or doctors on your street to care for your citizens, to care and provide for essential public services. We think when you decrease the government supply of money and bonds, you're going to have that huge impact on their ability to support the economy and support its people. Secondly, we think that bank accounts will run dry. People will remove their accounts, the money from European banks, from Greece banks, Portugal's banks, and Spain's banks. This will mean a freeze of the economic system. It will lead to a freeze in investment, where firms can't get money to invest. When firms and private investors can't get money to spend it and invest in the future. So this stymies the whole growth and investment of the European region. Thirdly, there will be decrease in overall investment in weaker countries like Portugal and Spain. There will be less FDI and direct investment into these countries. That translates to a harm to the long-term growth and prosperity of these countries. Because it means less infrastructure, it means less research and development. These are critical things to ensure that these countries maintain a critical and competitive edge when it comes to the future, when it comes to competing after the crisis has been over. No, thank you, sir. Now, we think, in fact, this contagion is not something to be stifled with, because it's precisely this contagion effect that brought down the whole Asian region during the Asian financial crisis a few decades ago. It is this effect that brought Thailand and Indonesia to its knees when debt snowballed and when investment dried up. So we think we can't afford a similar situation in the European Union. We think that confidence is far too low, and kicking Greece out of the EU will further decrease this confidence that people have, decrease the amount of faith and confidence that people have in supporting weaker countries in the Eurozone. So I think on the other side, they risk harming many weaker countries across the whole Eurozone, and that's ultimately bad for Europe's future. What's the second idea of how they endanger the future of bailouts? Now, I think currently in the status quo, which countries like Greece and Germany, Germany and France, are the ones who are financing these bailouts. And they are able to sell this bailout because of the rhetoric that we're all part of it together, we're all European, we're all in the same boats. But the moment you shatter the myth of unity, the moment you kick Greece out of the Eurozone, this myth of unity and all being European is shattered. No one now believes in this idea, so it becomes increasingly difficult to justify further bailouts to weaker countries like Portugal and Spain. And this is bad because it forcefully accelerates austerity in these countries. You cut through the fat and get to the muscle and to the bone. You cut through the muscle and the bone of these countries, you cut down the foundation of these countries, you tighten fiscal spending, you tighten fiscal policy to prevent further investment, prevent governments from having money to invest in the future and care for its citizens. And that's why we think it's so bad. Finally, others that harm political legitimacy of the EU when it fails to provide for citizens on the economic level. For these reasons, go to the side of the opposition.
Thank you, Leader of Opposition, and I call upon the Deputy Prime Minister.
Europe is in a very, very dangerous position. And you know that when China sells off almost the entirety of its Euro stock, when employment in Spain and Hungary fall below levels to its lowest point in decades, when Swiss financiers begin to distrust your economy, that's when you know Brexit is something that we must stand for today. Before we go any further, let's point out it was rather disingenuous for their side to conflate the European Union and the Eurozone together. One is a political union, one is an economic union, which means that lends us some form of flexibility in our policies. So while we believe that Greece deserves to be part of the broader European project, for example, being part of the political union, we are perfectly fine standing for a Brexit out of the Eurozone currency union, because that only causes third-party contagion harm to other states that don't deserve that kind of fallout. Two questions. Firstly, is this policy justified and effective? And secondly, how best do we achieve economic recovery? First question, is this policy even feasible to begin with? And the key underlying assumption coming from their side was that it's infeasible and impossible to change, say, the drachma, or the euro rather, back to the drachma increase because of financial disparity between Greece and the rest of the Eurozone. First of all, that's factually not true. Many countries historically have changed currencies in the past. Yes, we can see it in the short-term shocks, but in the long run, this is still possible. For example, in the past half a century, Germany has changed its currency twice. That hasn't stopped it from being the strongest economic power in Europe. No, thank you. Secondly, it's exactly because the Greece economy is so divergent from the rest of Europe that a currency change is exactly what Greece needs. It's exactly what Europe needs. No, thank you. Because Greece currency, the drachma, for example, is figured to be extremely devalued. Greece is a fundamentally export-driven market. This is comparatively different from richer countries, more developed countries and economies like Germany and France that thrive on bringing in imports because of their higher currency. It's exactly because of countries like Greece that are burdening the rest of the euro and the value of the eurozone. No, thank you. But even if Greece suffers in the short term, we're perfectly fine with that as well. Why? When Greece consented to joining the eurozone, when it signed the Treaty of Amsterdam and the Treaty of Lisbon, it accepted and it promised not to renege on its assurances to keep its budget in check. This means that when Greece decided to frivolously spend on public spending, when it expanded public welfare to the point that it could not afford it anymore, it consented to the fact, fully knowing that there were consequences in the future, that bailouts will never last forever. So even if Greece is hurt in the short term, we are perfectly legitimate standing by that. But then they accuse us of having an expansionary policy. We kick out Portugal and Italy as well. First of all, that's fundamentally different and disanalogous. Why? Portugal and Italy were cooperative. They agreed to keep their budgets in check. That's exactly what we saw, an 11% increase in the import market since we established austerity measures in those countries. But we're willing to extend our principle. If a hypothetical European country like Portugal went to the extent of Greece, demanding 7 bailouts and causing the rest of the Eurozone to go down along with them, we are perfectly fine having them leave the Eurozone as well. So that's why we are principally consistent. Second question, on economic recovery. Here they told us that they caused, or rather that we caused a diminished investor confidence due to financial contagion. No, there were several reasons why this isn't true. First of all, we argue that investor confidence will only increase on our side. Why? Think about the psychology of the average investor. The average investor on our side will be a lot more confident and encouraged to invest in a euro where they know governments are expected to keep their budgets accountable to a larger institution. No, investors on their side are less likely to invest when they know any other country could potentially abuse the moral hazard and abuse the system the Eurozone has set up to demand more bailouts and keep their budgets inflationary. That's exactly why investors won't support them on their side. So they gave you 3 harms. Firstly, government bonds being pulled out. Secondly, banks running dry. And 3, less investors and foreign investment. All these harms would not occur on our side because investors believe in a system of accountability. In fact, even if we assume that all those harms occurred, we can increase money supply through different measures. For example, below zero investment rates and quantitative easing, which was implemented in March to great success in countries that cooperated in austerity measures. So consequently, we believe this idea of unity isn't going to occur on their side, where countries are forced to compensate for the moral hazard when nations like Greece fail to keep up their promise. Our final argument is that we reinvigorate the European project. And this argument will demonstrate that Greece remaining in the Eurozone damages the universal belief in a united, integrated Europe. What is the story of Europe? Europe is a continent that has historically and traditionally been at war. It's a conflicted continent with different economies, different development stages. But before we go any further, yes, ma'am.
So why exactly would Greece want to have good political ties after it's been kicked out of the Eurozone and placed for all of that blame, even though now it's left in economic shambles?
First of all, we think it's perfectly fine that lots of the blame is placed on Greece because it was fundamentally and primarily Greece's own fault that it failed to keep its budget in check. More importantly, we believe that what's at stake here is a greater belief that the European Union can hold on to the standards that it set up for itself in the very first place. So why is European integration crucial and desirable? Why was the European Union and the Eurozone created to begin with? Because when Angela Merkel says things like she believes in the United States of Europe, it's a powerful symbol for European integration in the future. That countries believe in the shared economic prosperity of nations in Europe that can stand by similar principles of financial solvency and similar standards of helping each other to the point where you don't expect a bailout like Greece. No, thank you. How is the European dream harmed by Greece's continued unwillingness and systemic failure to be financially responsible, as my first speaker established very clearly? First of all, this puts into question the standards and the willingness that the EU can to remain resolute. When Greece demands a bailout nearly 7 times and only forces concessions time and time again, it suggests that the EU really isn't that much willing to stand by the principles it set out. Secondly, it creates a toxic political atmosphere with regards to what to do with Greece. The problem with the Greece issue is that bailing out Greece happens outside constitutional limits set up by the European Union. This means that countries have subjective views on what to do. France accusing Germany of trying to forward a domineering European agenda. Germany accusing Italy of riding on concessions to Greece to finance its own frivolous budgets. Greece demanding that Germany pay up Nazi war debt. This is exactly the kind of toxic political atmosphere that will prevent further integration of both the Eurozone and the European Union. Finally, this also empowers the rhetoric of critics skeptical of European integration. Critics around the world and within Europe itself, for example, extremist and xenophobic parties like UKIP that often support policies that hurt minority groups, will point to Greece and point to the cancer of Greece and suggest that that's exactly why European Union and European reintegration will never happen. But on our side, we can solve this problem by showing that the EU and the Eurozone is going to remain resolute and firm by the high standards that it established on itself during its conception. That's exactly the kind of powerful symbol that will draw supporters to its cause. For all these reasons, we're very proud to stand alongside government.
Thank you, Deputy Prime Minister. I call upon the Deputy Minister of Position. Yes,
First proposition speaker told us that the Eurozone is an economic entity, right? And that EU is a political entity. Second proposition speaker runs a substantive about how we promote political unity. So who's right and who's wrong? So secondly, we'd like to point out today that I have 3 points of contention, right? So the first one is on the policy of one-to-one exchange rate. So I'd like to point to you that their rebuttal to this was oblique, because our argument was that the one-to-one exchange rate wouldn't work. Secondly, I'm going to talk to you about how Eurozone is a political entity. I'll integrate this later by substantive on how we better how they wreck the European dream. And secondly, I'm going to talk about how how this promotes economic stability for Greece in the short run and long run. So let's first talk about the policy, right, of the one-to-one exchange rate, right? They ignored my first opposition speaker's analysis that there's huge downward pressure as investors sell your bonds, right? So when investors sell your bonds, the currency floods the current international currency market.
that means that your currency starts falling because now there's so much oversupply of funds in the market in the first place. Examples which they don't have. Thank you, sir. Firstly, in the 1996 Asian financial crisis, the decision of Thailand to remove the peg to the USD caused Asian financial crisis because after that, the baht devalued by 180%. Second example, Mexico in 1991, when the peso was devalued by over 220% because they removed the peg also to the USD. What this means is that on their side, there's huge downward pressure on poor governments who don't have sufficient foreign reserves and therefore are not capable of keeping this peg in the first place. Then maybe third might tell us, well, then the Eurozone will pay for the peg. Wait for a moment, like, why would they do that, right? You're already kicking them out in the first place. Why spend money on them? So we try the next speaker to tell us, how are they going to sustain the peg when nobody has the money to do this? The second thing they told us was, in second proposition, that Greece is Greece is very different from Germany, correct? And therefore, like, we should only have similar countries in the Eurozone. Firstly, like, at this point of time, also point out that they also consider that they're very happy to kick other countries out, like Spain and Portugal. Like, it is quite fortunate, right? Because they want a Eurozone, like kind of an elite Eurozone, right? Where we're all rich, we're all huge, and and we are all of a particular so we all have similar economies. But secondly, I think it hurts the idea of creating an accommodating European Union, right? Where all countries, regardless of what economy you have, regardless of what political history you might have, regardless of what kind of country or demographics you might have, can also join the European Union. This once again this idea, at the point of time, we were trying to integrate countries like Turkey, like Poland, like Cyprus, countries with very different, very different traditions from like the Western Europe in the first place, very different histories from Western Europe in the first place, that are trying to integrate them anyway because they believe that this European dream is worthwhile. Then they told us about how, then the next thing they told us, right, and this is the main line, right, that Greece was systemically failed to meet austerity plans, and therefore we should kick them out. There are several problems with this. Firstly, like, there are several reasons they gave for this. Let's take this down one by one. The first thing they told us is that they can't do it because of economic reasons. Right? That's precisely why they need the aid now, right? On their side, by denying the aid to Greece, they are allowing Greece to fail. I'm going to tell you how this strengthens far-right parties in my substantive. Secondly, then they told us that political support is lacking in these countries. But that's not true, right? The political support is because people are suffering today. They can't get a job, they can't put food on the table, they see their son unemployed, and they found outrageous. On our side, by promoting a long-term plan that allows Greece to be put on the path of economic growth, we address these concerns. So in the long run, political support will come to our side anyway. Secondly, even if this was true, you worsen it again. I'm going to talk about this in my substantive. Then the next thing they told us was about how this is bad for the Eurozone, right? And how investors will invest. Okay, so the next thing they told us was that investors will invest when they know that the rules will be followed, right? Rather than investor confidence. Firstly, like, our rules are already in place, right? No, thank you, sir. Like, after what happened with Greece, what happened was that the ECB commissioned a study to test every single central bank in the European Union and kind of found like 2/3 of them failed, right? So, but that's not the point. The point is that they already tried to improve transparency in the entire European Union regarding its rules. Secondly, there's a time frame problem here, right? So, thank you, sir. Because investors are currently far more scared of losing their investments in these countries rather than you imposing some arbitrary rules that have no time, that have no reason, they have no impact on whether or not they will keep their investments today. So we suggest to you, when investors have hundreds of billions of dollars tied up in investments in Spain and Portugal, they don't really care about your rules, they care more about whether or not you're going to kick them out and force them into contagion. Right? So again, they've never really talked about my first speaker's point on contagion. We think we fairly take that point. So now I'm going to move on to my substantive. We are also going to clash with the entire idea of the political dream. Let's here point out that they never really responded to my first speaker's point about how the economic dream is important to the political dream. Why is this the case? Because when people are hungry, when people are starving, they don't see the benefits of a larger economic goal, right? What they want in the first place is to feed their families. So at the point of time, when this larger sustaining this larger political goal is compromising on their ability to feed their family, to find a job, to lead a happy life, these people are far more likely than not, no thank you sir, also going to reject the political dream. So on our side, we're going to tie the link very closely between the economic and political dreams on our side, within both come hand in hand, especially in the case of the Eurozone. So on my substantive now, how do we hurt the political dream by empowering far-right parties?
Yes, sir. Why won't your side's financial regulations also alienate a great public which opposes austerity?
Because the financial regulations, okay, on our side, financial regulations are something that are fairer, right? On your side, when you're telling them that we impose austerity on you for the past 3 years, now we're going to kick you out because you couldn't fulfill those austerity measures. Like that kind of sounds you being a bastard, right? On your side, what happens is that the Greek, like, and this is my subtitle now, right? Because now this what happens is that nationalist parties in these countries will see it as a betrayal of Germany, right? Because Germany told them we will save you, but the only way for us to save you and guarantee your salvation is when you follow these rules in the first place. So at the point of time when Germany now decides that you're not worth it in the first place, Germany sees Greece sees it as an absolute as an abrogation of the promise that they made in the first place. What's the harm of this? The harm of this is for the other countries that are also threatened and are also under austerity measures now. Why is it the case? Because far right rhetoric now is that EU austerity is here to cripple us all. When they see Greece being kicked out because they couldn't fulfill those austerity measures, what they'll say now instead is this: that the EU government put us in this misery and currently will lead and will throw us the walls just because we couldn't fulfill this in the first place. What are the impacts of this? Firstly, political referendums on leaving the Eurozone are now going to be swung in favor of leaving the Eurozone in the first place. So on their side, they harm that. Secondly, even if this was not true, you vote right-wing parties into power, right? Do you really want to see UKIP in power in the UK? No. Secondly, even if we accepted all of this was wrong, right, you will also strengthen the rhetoric by these far-right parties, and you make it a lot harder for moderate parties to carry out policies in the first place, because now they need to moderate their policies in respect to these far-right parties. They need to move further down the spectrum on the right, and this means it makes it a lot harder for them to convince the parties of more moderate policies in the first place. And therefore, because I've shown you that we don't that allowing Greece to exit the euro harms the economic dream and harms the political dream, please go with opposition.
Thank you, Deputy Leader of Opposition. I call upon the government whip. Yeah.
The bulk of opposition's case was premised that Portugal, Italy, or other nations which are currently under austerity was very similar to Greece and will end up in situations which will lead to capital outflow, will lead to consumer confidence being reduced. But let's make this clear. Greece had its first finance minister walk out on a meeting when they were discussing a bailout. It was Greece which was the first person to exercise political wingmanship and demand Nazi reparations from Stalin when he entered into talks with Germany. It was Greece which initiated, in this specific instance, using EU bailout and using EU austerity measures as a means to further political ends. It is Greece which elected a government which was anti-austerity, reflecting the populace was anti-austerity as well. Greece is a unique and specific instance which we apply in this case needs to be removed from the Eurozone because it defeats the values of the Eurozone and also harms economic recovery. My two areas of clash today. First, let's talk about the values of the Eurozone. So the key value that both sides really want to uphold at the end of the day is the idea of unity in terms of both the political and economic truth. But what is this unity premised upon? This unity is not premised upon a genuine assumption that the EU will continue to exist. It is premised upon the rules by which the EU continues to follow. So thank you, sir. What does this mean? It means that breaking the rules also breaks the unity. It will continue to allow countries to flout the rules that bind these countries together and that bind and create unity. We also destroy this political dream in the long term. Now let me show you why it is systemic that Greece will continue to break these rules and therefore break unity. Why? This came out in first but no clear response. One, Greece is inherently anti-austerity. In fact, we saw through every bailout demand, it was exponential. It demanded more and more as each bailout came. They are anti-austerity and the huge populace does not support the policies that the EU put in place. So don't let them lie to you and say they were under austerity for the past 3 years because they were doing it half-heartedly anyway. They didn't implement the full scale of economic austerity that we wanted and the EU or the Eurozone implemented on Greece. So don't let them lie to you that they have been suffering in the past. They are only suffering from their bad economic mistakes. And no, don't argument. Don't let them say that they are unable to do this because they were economically incapable in the first place. That was not the analysis that came from first. The analysis was clear and it was this. It is not about whether they are economically able, but the policies that they chose to adopt. So they had the choice to adopt austerity and they equally had the choice not to adopt the economic budget that they eventually defaulted to and caused their further demise in terms of their economy. So they made this choice by electing Syriza and choosing to adopt this budget. The idea was the choice they actively made. They were not economically incapable, they were able to make that political choice. That's why when they chose and when they systemically broke the rules, they systemically broke unity. But let's talk a little bit about building the European dream as well. And mind you, this is not a contradiction because we argue that both the economic and political dream can exist as well. The analysis that came out in second was this: we remove a toxic political atmosphere, we can't start accusing others of using the EU as a political mechanism. No response from their side. Then their only contention was really about, oh, people want to think about feeding the families and they won't think about the larger European dream. Here's the catch: if Greece continues to stay in the EU, every EU country will think about feeding their families and none of them will care about the European dream. So if we want people to care about the European dream, primarily, if the choice between everyone caring about the state of the economy because it is volatile, rather than a single country will prefer that Greece lose out on this. But how do we win Greece in the long term? Because in the here and now, if they are going to impose regulations anyway, they would lose Greece. The only way we can get Greece back is for them to achieve some sort of economic stability in the long term and then re-engage them through diplomatic means. Perhaps they will never be reintegrated in the Eurozone, or they will remain in the EU and continue to remain politically engaged. That is how we best build the European dream on our side for everyone, not just Greece. Second question then, what is the idea of economic recovery? How does it play in here, and how do we ensure economic recovery for the Eurozone? First, we talk about deflationary spirals, right from first speaker, no clear response from their side. Second, we talk about harming consumer confidence. Hold a minute, man, and about how there is a systemic decrease in FDIs since Greece started to adopt such economic policies. But don't you, but before that, go ahead.
We think that deflation is a lot better than currency contagion on your side. Tell me how controlled deflation is not as bad as the dropping of the Thai baht and the yen.
Okay, I was going to talk about conflation later, and I'll flag it out for you. But let me just finish this idea of consumer confidence first, since it was a key part of the second speaker's case as well. Here is the comparison. Consumer confidence drops when there is a sense of volatility. It means that when you continue to have Greece within the Eurozone and people continue to see the Eurozone as a volatile currency, people will be less likely to invest in this. There was no clear response to an idea from volatility which came out. In first, the comparison clearly is stability. Does this mean that Greece will lose out because Greece is volatile as an economy? Yes. But does the motion also say that what is best for the Eurozone economy should uphold? Yes. That is why we believe it is in the Eurozone's interest to continue to reduce this volatility. But even if we accept their argument about capital outflow, even if we accept that some money will be lost, we believe there are ways to mitigate this. Now, how the ECB implemented below zero interest rates to reduce capital outflow. So we don't believe that the impact will be that large anyway. So we don't believe they win consumer confidence. It's outside that reduces volatility, even if it is at the cost of Greece. But now let me deal with contagion, and therefore there's the second speaker, the third speaker rather's POI. Here's the thing: they cannot compare contagion in Greece and in the Eurozone to contagion in the Asian financial crisis. Here's the distinction: in the Eurozone, people still believe in the collective common market and still believe in the collective currency, and that's why they will continue to remain strong even after Greece has left. So thank you, sir. Why is this different from the Asian financial crisis? Because the Asian financial crisis was not only precipitated by Thailand devaluing or having its bank devalued, but also a fragmentation of the common dream towards the common market and towards a common currency in the long term. So this fragmentation of the dream was what precipitated the contagion in the first place. So don't let them lie to you that it will be the same in the EU or the Eurozone, because it will be different. We don't think that contagion will happen. Then they said, oh, Greece is weak and it will come at immense cost when we have Greece pull out of the Eurozone. One, it is possible for Greece to remain sustainable. Will it receive shocks in the short term? Yes, something we already admitted straight up from first. But was there precedent as well of countries being stable after economic transition and transition away from the currency? Yes. In fact, we believe that revaluation of the currency, no matter how much instability caused in the short term, will be good for Greece in the long term. So if we really want to argue on the benefits of Greece, revaluation is ultimately better because they're now having a currency that's back too high for the economy to be able to support. But this debate is primarily about the Eurozone, so let's focus back there on that then. The last idea, the future of bailout. When it comes to bailout, we think that political brinkmanship is the worst thing to play as a card to ensure the sustainability of bailouts. We don't believe that bailouts will work on their side. Ultimately, we uphold the values of the euro and we ensure economic recovery. We stand very firmly with government.
Thank you, Governor. I now call upon the opposition.
We have a side that believes that contagion won't happen when we've already proven to you that economies are based on trust. And the trust right now is basically that no one will ever exit the Eurozone. That the ECB promises that it will be debt in it at some cost placed in Greece, that Greece will remain. And we don't think it's ever beneficial for the Eurozone or Greece entirely to exit the Eurozone. We think that what their side doesn't understand is that that Greece leaving is basically a concession of economic failure on the part of the Eurozone, and we go against that. Two main points of contention for the side. Firstly, is Brexit necessarily beneficial? And secondly, on the entire idea of political unity as a result of Brexit. So firstly, their entire policy is flawed. They believe that just because you have a one-to-one exchange rate in this drachma, that somehow it will be able to tide over economic problems. We don't think that's necessarily the case. There's a difference when Germany switched from the Reichsmark to the Eurozone. Everyone was betting and speculating that the Euro would be all right. There was no huge amount of sovereign debt on Germany back then. There was no huge amount of speculation going against the Eurozone. But right now, when Greece had a huge over 400% public debt, no, thank you, sir. No, thank you, sir. When Greece already has huge sovereign debt and everyone believes that Greece is not going to be able to pay back its bonds, and it clearly can't, because once people's confidence drops, Greece is more likely to default, and therefore, as a result, they're unable to pay back their debts, and it becomes even more increasingly difficult. Once their currency plunges, it's therefore going to become even harder to pay back debts and loans in other exchange rates. No, thank you, sir. And because of that, we think that it's even more detrimental and dangerous for Greece to exit the Eurozone, and it's worse because ultimately we'll look at these other countries such as Spain, Portugal, and Italy and believe, even though it's irrational, ladies and gentlemen, we must understand that investors are not rational individuals. Once they see that Greece has been reduced to economic shambles, they ask themselves, who else has ridiculously high sovereign debt? Who else might necessarily break austerity measures and break these rules? They look at Spain, and yes, Italy, Spain, and Portugal might be obeying the rules now, and not breaking them like Greece. But in the event that they break them, what their side is going to say is that, yeah, we should kick them out of the Eurozone. So what is stopping these individuals and investors from saying it's really tenuous that the Eurozone is even being held together? Because it's not being held together on a promise of unity, but it's being held together on a promise of conditional rule following. And we don't think that that's necessarily beneficial, and their side cannot assure us that the Eurozone will stay intact because they've already admitted that if you don't follow our rules, you're going to be kicked out. So therefore, if other countries don't follow these rules, they'll be similarly kicked out as well. What do you say to that?
Can't the investors simply look at whether or not countries are abiding by these rules and decide the value of the currency from there?
No, sir. We don't think that investors are that necessarily rational to evaluate the full extent of a country's sovereign debt. The reason why Singapore, Malaysia, and Malaysia suffered from the AFC, the Asian financial crisis, was not because they had huge amounts of sovereign debt. It's because people looked at Southeast Asia, they said Thailand is sort of in trouble, and Indonesia has large sovereign debt. But ultimately, Singapore is also in Southeast Asia, and therefore it's also contagious. And therefore, contagion is not rational. Economics is not rational, and investors plot at the slight danger of losing their investments. And because of that, we need to understand that there's a huge pull away from these markets, and you're going to drop the currency in any situation. Now, the entire idea is that it's important for Greece to follow austerity measures. We think that yes, austerity measures are good, but austerity measures don't always need to be followed. Sometimes austerity measures can be worse for the Eurozone, for example. It's precisely because austerity measures, for example, cut public spending. Therefore, individuals in these countries don't want to spend their money, and we have less investments. What their side is doing is that we're encouraging a more accountable and more accommodating Eurozone, where the Greek government can accommodate and can negotiate austerity measures and the terms in which austerity measures are placed upon their country, making it more amenable to their people, and because of that, accepting these rules. We don't think that it's a top-down approach where Germany says, do these austerity measures, if not, we'll kick you out. We want a negotiation of what austerity measures are. That's increasingly difficult for countries to stay in the Eurozone and increasingly politically disincentivized towards remaining in the Eurozone. So why would you want to stay if there's a fear of breaking these rules? And furthermore, now tying this back into Clarence's argument that it reduces the idea of a bailout. Why will countries such as Germany want to invest in the sunk cost of a bailout to perhaps Spain and Portugal if they are worried that far-right parties are already gaining precedence in these countries? When Spain and Portugal already have far-right influence, asking them to reduce austerity measures on Spain and Portugal, why would they would fear the potential of rule breaking in the future? And because of that, it will become increasingly difficult for any country to believe that the European dream will ever exist. Now, we also need to understand that all the problems caused in the Eurozone aren't necessarily predicated or caused by Greece. Greece is not Greece is not going to magically become a panacea for European improvement. In fact, numerous other countries also have very terrible, lax monetary and fiscal policy. Hungary, for example, has huge sovereign debt caused by its own public sector spending. We don't think that it's necessary that just because you kick Greece out, it's necessarily going to absolve all the crimes of the Eurozone. In fact, it's almost a kind of political concession because it's blaming Greece too much for for other countries' own fiscal policies. In fact, Greece remaining in the Eurozone might force the ECB to have tougher regulations, to expect more from their countries, and therefore to have better monetary union and improve the European Union in the first place, because you change the kinds of terms and you change the mechanisms in which EU is based on. On their side, they're just going to expect that these rules are going to be beneficial. Now, moving on to my second point on the idea of whether or not there will be political unity. Now, the other side seems to convolutedly believe that there's a difference between that somehow political tensions between Germany and Italy are less bad than potential economic collapse in Greece. We need to understand that when Greece is put in economic turmoil, it will have a huge political fissure between. Not only that, but when numerous other countries are already facing we think that political tensions caused by austerity measures are less bad than political tensions caused by entire regional economic crisis and collapse. This is why we're saying on our side that contagion is going to more likely occur, and because of that, it's going to necessarily be a detriment to political union as a whole. In fact, if they've already admitted that economics and political unity are conditional upon each other, therefore we cannot let any country go, because that means that we let one country fall, and we let one country within this political unity to necessarily leave and break away from this idea of the European dream. Because our side stands on the European dream, and our side understands that even deflation is better than control, than ultimate economic collapse and contagion. Please go to the side for the opposition.
Thank you, all good. And now for reply to the speeches from the opposition, we are still.
Imagine you're an investor, and on side propositions, they will tell you that at one point of time, the ECB will announce that Greece is going to leave the Eurozone. What's most important to you here? What's important to you is your confidence in the assets of not just in Greece, but also in Spain and Portugal. Why is it the case? Because in Greece, you know that you're going to lose those assets already, right? Because at a point of time, they never really responded to our text on their policy about how their currency would depreciate. So in these cases, investors have lost all their investments in these countries and in Greece already. So what we're telling you today, and the most important point coming from opposition, is that once the ECB breaks the promise to never let any single country leave the Eurozone, this raises doubts in investors' mind. You shatter the previous confidence that the investors had, that the ECB will always be there. And because of this, what will investors do next? They look at the next country, right? They look at the next country beside Greece. Maybe it's Spain, maybe it's Portugal. The specifics don't matter. The point of the matter is, they start looking and digging deeper into what the finances of these countries are like. And then they realize there's something wrong. There's something wrong with these countries there. Maybe 260% looked fine a while ago, but Greece had 280% and they got kicked out. So maybe I should play a little bit safer and just give up my investments in Spain as well. What happens after that is that more investors increasingly do so, because as you increasingly do so, Spain is not the currency of Spain depreciates, and there's a lot of pressure on the government, and eventually what people see is that these investments leave gradually as other investors realize that other investors are leaving that country as well. So on our side, the most important point is this, that as an investor, I look at other investors and how they act as well. When I see one country getting kicked out of the Eurozone and the ECB breaking that previously inviolable promise, I lose that faith in the ECB in whatever it says anymore. So now I start looking at who's the next person who I should leave, because I have hundreds of billions of dollars in investments, not necessarily my own money, but other people's money as well that's tied up in that country. I can't afford to take that kind of risk. And that's what we're talking about on our side, right? We're talking about the Asian financial crisis, talk to you about the Mexican peso crisis. And the reason for this are simple, right? People are irrationally afraid of losing that money in the first place. It's a huge sum of money, it's fairly understandable. As an investor, volatility is created on their side when the ECB promise is broken. So even if we accepted this, right, then it tells that you have rules in place, right? So this reduces the volatility in the first place. But as an investor, am I more concerned that you're going to implement rules that are meant for a long run
long-run problem, or I'm more concerned about saving my investment today? And we think that the answer is obvious. But then they told us that, then my third opposition speaker evolved this point, right? But how would ECB bail fringe countries then? Because if they're going to bail our country, which they kind of know is going to fail anyway, like why would they spend the money in the first place? It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. At this point of time, investors know this, all your fringe countries are going to die out. Now then the second thing, right, on the political dream, right? Now we imagine ourselves as a different person, as a citizen, right? They told us another political dream that countries will constantly fight over like who fulfills the rules or not. But like a citizen, it's one thing to me. When we gave you on our substantive, right, we told you about how there's going to be huge far-right rhetoric, right? That your countries, that the ECB forces to take this rhetoric, forces to take this austerity, this bitter pill, and now it's telling us, I'm sorry, the bitter pill was the wrong solution, we're going to give up on you now. So on this side, you're going to empower far-right rhetoric, and that makes it a lot harder for countries to fight back against anti-EU sentiments. This directly harms the political dreams, either because right-wing parties are now voting into parliament, or because the moderate parties are now have to face and now have to contest more heavily with these far-right parties in the first place. So on the outside, as a citizen, I'm far more moved by the fact that far-right parties are going to be emboldened and strengthened on the outside rather than the useless bickering between politicians that I don't really care about. So because investors and citizens clearly prefer that Greece doesn't exit the Eurozone, please go to the side of opposition. Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Pranav, for the speech for the final.
To answer opposition's question, if I were a citizen, the thing I think about is how to feed my family and not feed the Greek state. Because it's unfortunate the Eurozone is in shambles. It's also unfortunate that Greece is bleeding Europe dry and is full knowledge as well. But the greatest misfortune of today falls upon the millions of innocent Europeans who never consented to sacrificing their livelihoods just to keep an entire country on life support. So helping Greece is ideal, but also incidental to the broader moral duties that we owe Europe. And that's the reason why their side was completely disingenuous throughout this entire debate. Let's talk about the vote on the opposition. A vote that will leave Europe to feed off the debts of Greece despite no others to fight. It's exactly because of the sunk cost that their side talked about that we won't do that. Because this means that the average Hungarian man, middle class, moderately educated, will see his rate depressed immensely to the point where he must fund the frivolous whims and fancies of a toxic state. It means that the average Italian student will never see her way through college without incurring tuition debts larger than any income she could ever dream of in the future. This was a side that will leave Europe to harm economic reform and recovery with a devalued currency that falls beyond artificial limits. They never responded to our arguments on deflationary limits, for example. It was a side that would diminish investor confidence because the euro value falls volatile. They also reduced financial latitude when their side didn't even allow countries to use bailout money to fund their own programs. And in fact, what we heard late material in their opposition speaker was that austerity may be bad sometimes. But between their third speaker and the reply speaker, we weren't sure if investors were rational or not. There was exactly the kind of inconsistencies that we heard throughout this entire debate and in the way they saw the euro problem. But it's also a side that will renege on the principles of the Eurozone. They will renege on the fact that in Lisbon, in Amsterdam, in Maastricht, we laid out very clear standards that we expected countries to be accountable to and renege on every single one of those assurances. So they can't tell us that they'll renege on those principles and that investors will still support them. We gave them systemic reasons why Greece, for example, political brinkmanship will always mean that they are unwilling to cooperate with the rest of Europe in European unity. Let's talk about the vote of the proposition. We will offer you a far more amenable vision of a Europe that is geared towards recovery, where we stood by the principles of the Eurozone. We will agree that when countries consented to join this union and this currency union, they agreed to keep by promises to keep their budgets in check. Failing to do so is principally just to endanger everyone else that consented to the very same standards. On this side, we promised economic reform and recovery. We ensure that the euro won't devalue artificially, for example. That investors will progressively and gradually build up their confidence in a European state once again. But more importantly, and perhaps most crucially, we stood by the full support of a European project. We recognize the tumultuous history of Europe, recognizing that in the future, European integration is something we want to work towards, something that their side only harms even more when countries abuse the moral hazard of institutions in the Eurozone only to help their own ends and their own fancies. Consequently, because it was truly outside that recognized that Eurozone wasn't only about bailing Greece out, but recognizing that every single European state deserved help, not to bail out another country that abuses the moral hazards. We were very proud to stand on the side of government.
Thank you, team. You may now go back to the voting.
Thank you. Thank you.